In case you missed it, this week on It's a Wonderful Podcast. On Monday, we had a brand new episode of Morgan Hasn't Seen TV, Discovering Dawson's Creek. As we got into Season 4, Episode 11, The Tao of Dawson, and Episode 12, The Tay of Pacey. We get into our thoughts on these character-focused episodes, the building of the Dawson-Gretchen relationship, the further insight we get on Pacey's family life, the budding romance between Grams and Mr. Brooks, and so much more. I hope you'll check out this week's episode of Discovering Dawson's Creek, which alternates every week with diving into Doctor Who, and new episodes of Morgan/Janine Hasn't Seen TV every Monday on the It's a Wonderful Podcast YouTube channel, and now on the It's a Wonderful podcast feed. And on Wednesday, we had a brand new episode of Morgan Hasn't Seen, as we closed out our John Grisham adaptation series with The Pelican Brief. We get into how this film differs from the other John Grisham adapted films we talked in this series, the chemistry between these two big-named actors in Denzel Washington and Julia Roberts, Morgan's ranking for all the films in the series, and more. So I hope you'll check out this week's episode of Morgan Hasn't Seen, talking The Pelican Brief, and find new episodes of Morgan Hasn't Seen every Wednesday on the It's a Wonderful Podcast feed. And then on Friday, we closed out the Brit Noir series with Night and the City. On the episode, we get into Richard Widmark's performance as this lost grifter, how we feel about the American leads in this British-set film, the story, the ill-fated characters, and more. I hope you'll check out this week's episode of our Classic Films podcast, talking Night in the City, and find new episodes of It's a Wonderful Podcast every Friday on the It's a Wonderful Podcast feed. Coming up next week, on Monday, we'll have a brand new episode of Janine Hasn't Seen TV, diving into Doctor Who, as we talk the Season 1 finale, The Parting of the Ways. We might also share what's going to be taking its place for a short time before we get back into Season 2 of Doctor Who. Then on Wednesday's episode of Morgan Hasn't Seen, we'll be kicking off our December series, closing out the year talking films that are not quite Christmas. And we'll be kicking off that series with 1999's Go. Then on Friday's episode of It's a Wonderful Podcast, we'll also be kicking off our December series there with 70s Christmas horror, starting with 1972's Tales from the Crypt. Also keep an eye out for our bonus podcast episode, where we'll be sharing our answers and your answers to our weekly podcast questions. We always have a fun time diving into your picks, so be sure to check that out. Don't forget to keep an eye on my socials for our weekly podcast questions, so that your answers will appear on the next bonus episode. Also on my socials, we'll be doing some polls to help us decide which movie in December on either podcast is going to get a video podcast episode. So I hope you'll check out everything we had going on this week, and we'll see you next week for more.